Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the United States of America, where the 47th President of the United States made lots of very important and interesting statements. The operation is over, the patient lived and is healing. The prognosis is that the patient will be far stronger, bigger, better and more resilient than ever before. Make America great again. Trump comments on his decision to introduce import tariffs. The patient survived and recovering. Of course, very interesting words and statements made by Donald Trump, and we will see that he strongly believes in what he is saying, but telling the truth, when talking about the US market, we see a completely different picture. We see that the operation is not over, we see that the patient is not healing, and we see that more likely the situation is completely opposite. US stock markets close to sea of red. 2.9 trillion wiped out after Trump's tariffs announcement. S&P 500 and Nasdaq have worst days since June 2020. So of course, let's wait and see what is going to be next. Maybe the patient is going to survive and recover. Another important thing is that from one side, the Western countries and the United States of America are not in a very good relations, but on the other side, we see that Donald Trump continue improving his relations with the Russian Federation. Putin's envoy in Washington dialogue with Trump camp restarts what Biden destroyed. Russia is back in Washington. On direct orders from President Putin, special envoy Kirill Dmitriev has held high-level meetings in Washington with representatives of Trump administration. The dialogue between Russia and the United States, crucial for the entire world, was completely broken under the Biden administration, Dmitriev said. Restoring dialogue is a difficult and gradual process, but each meeting, each candid conversation helps move things forward. Another important statement from NATO members. Norway's foreign minister says, for example, Trump's tariffs may have breached NATO Article 2. Article 2, also known as the Washington Treaty, stipulates that international relations between member states should be conducted peacefully and with mutual respect, and promotes the elimination of opposition factors about international economic policies. Obviously, the article number 2 was broken yesterday when Donald Trump introduced additional tariffs to the European countries. Today, also the statements and Washington's tariffs policy have found some reaction from the European countries. For example, today Emmanuel Macron made a lot of important statements. One thing is for sure, as a result of decisions that have been taken, the American economy and Americans, whether business or citizens, will be weaker than they were yesterday and poorer. Another important statement, another important piece of news is coming from Brussels. Let's discuss this in details. European Union prepares major penalties against Elon Musk. That was published by the New York Times. European regulators are considering fining X more than 1 billion after weighing the risks of further antagonization Mr. Musk and President Trump. So we see that the first signs and the first step in this trade war between the United States of America and the European countries. Of course, Germany also made lots of important statements. This time the statements were made by the German Vice Chancellor. Trump will bend under pressure and correct his statements. The German Vice Chancellor believes that Europe should push back on Trump's tariffs and not submit to Trump like the tech CEO at the inauguration. So we see that the conflict between the United States of America and the European Union is intensifying. So anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. And now let's return back to Ukraine, because when talking about Ukraine, the conflict continues, and we see that most likely both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, are preparing themselves before another round of escalation. Russia is preparing 15 new divisions for a large-scale offensive, deputy head of Zelensky's office. Russia plans to increase its group in Ukraine by 150,000 people, and this is enough to, let's say, take under control the Chernihiv region or the Sumy region. This is about 15 new motorized rifle divisions. Their formation continues. Russia has no problems with attracting personnel. In the near future, the Russian armed forces will put maximum pressure on those areas where this is possible. The Russian army continues to gradually advance, trying to push through individual sectors of the front, having tactical successes. We understand that Zelensky everything understand. He see everything. He see that situation is very difficult. He see that the trade war between the Western countries and the European Union has begun. So that is why he is beginning changing his position regarding territories. Zelensky allowed the possibility of compromises on the territories lost by Ukraine. If it is possible to find a compromise so that the return of these territories occurs over time through diplomatic means, I think that probably as far as some territories are concerned, this will be the only way, he said at a meeting with entrepreneurs. However, he stressed that Kiev does not recognize these territories as Russian and that this is one of the red lines. Another important thing is that this is not just the statements and opinion of Zelensky. This opinion and the same opinion share with him the General Christopher Kavolid, NATO's top military commander in the region. Let's listen to his words and what was he talking about regarding Ukraine counteroffensive operation, possible.
There's nothing inevitable in war. And the Ukrainians are in very strong defensive positions right now and are improving weekly their ability to generate force and to reinforce those positions. It is hard sitting here right now to envision a major Ukrainian offensive that clears everybody, out of every square inch of Ukraine. But likewise, it's very hard to envision Ukraine collapsing and losing that conflict. I do not think there's an inevitability to a Ukrainian loss.
So as you can see, he believes that it is also hard to imagine Ukraine falling apart and losing this conflict. So the Christopher Kavolid tried to say that situation right now is 50-50. But let's discuss the situation on the ground and let's understand whether the situation indeed 50-50. And first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. According to information we have during the previous 24 hours, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly and to take under control several stronghold positions that are located to the southeast of the village of Kamenskaya. So these are the changes on the map according to different neutral mappers. The Russians are advancing, and we believe that the Russians are planning to establish complete control over the southern part of the settlement of Kamenskaya before possible beginning of Russian greatest major offensive operation with the use of those 150,000 soldiers we've been talking several minutes ago. So according to our understanding, the Russians will try to take under control everything in this part. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Bogatyr direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians also managed to improve their positions. We have lots of icons with flags, as you can see. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take under control several tree lines and strongholds in the fields between the settlements of Constantinople, Rozliv and Bogatyr. This information was provided us by neutral mappers and by pro-Russian resources. As for now, as you can see, without any geolocations that can confirm this. Now let's discuss the situation in the vicinity of the city of Pokrovsk, and probably for the first time for the previous several days we haven't received anything from this direction. Maybe the Russians managed to stabilize the situation, maybe this is something like a silent before storm, because the Ukrainians are about to cut the salient between the settlements of Udachne, Kotlina and Volkova, and if the Ukrainians are able to do this, this is going to be a huge problem for the Russians, because then they will be forced to change their positions and regroup their forces and to introduce additional reinforcements with this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction. According to information we have, the Russians continue their offensive operation or are about to begin their major assault in the direction of Novopoltavka. This information today was provided us by pro-Ukrainian sources. The Russians are trying to break through the Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka highway. That was stated by the headquarters of Hortitsa. Russian troops are trying to break through east of Pokrovsk, in particular to the Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka highway, and are now actively attacking in all directions. That was stated by the spokesman Viktor Tregubov. And I'll remind you that just yesterday we discussed this video when the Russians, as a result of attack, managed to destroy the entire minefield that Ukrainians prepared with the purpose to slow down the Russians. As a result of some attack, this minefield was completely destroyed, and now we understand that Novopoltovka is completely unsecured and unprotected from the south. We expect the beginning of Russian major offensive from minute to minute. Another important update is coming from the city of Toretsk itself. Today, according to information we have, the Russians managed to secure the Zabalka micro-district completely. This information today was provided by neutral mappers. The Ukrainians retreat towards the village of Sherbaki and Novospaska-Lebedevka. And the sources are saying that the Russians also are about to begin their major offensive operation along the river of Kryvyi Torets with the purpose to take all settlements and villages in this area under complete control and to shorten the distance to the Kliban-Bytskaya water reservoir. If the Russians are able to get these territories under complete control, then the Ukrainians would be forced to use just one supply line and 20 road between the city of Konstantinovka and this pocket to the south of the Kliban-Bytskaya water reservoir. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kupyansk direction. As for this area, the Ukrainians are actively counterattacking the Russians with the use of forces of the 3rd Azov Brigade, and now the Ukrainians are trying to attack the village of Raigorodka. The main purpose of the Ukrainians is to cut the only supply line in this area, the road between Stepe, Raigorodka, and further in the eastern directions towards Stepova. This is very important territory, and if Ukrainians are able to force the Russians to fall back from this territory, then the Ukrainians will be able to cut almost the only supply line that the Russians use to support their forces on the line between the settlements of Kopanki, Stepe, and Vishneva. Once again, if Ukrainians are able to establish complete control over this territory, this can lead to complete collapse of Russian lines to the west of this settlement, and this can force the Russians to begin regrouping from this territory further in the northern direction towards the settlement of Andreevka, Mesajarovka. So this is very interesting operation that currently the Ukrainians are trying to carry out. But the only problem is that Ukrainians suffer huge losses. For example, today the Ukrainians lost another infantry fighting vehicle, but if we increase the numbers of updates, let's say since the beginning of January, then we're gonna see hundreds of icons, hundreds of episodes of events that took place exactly in this area, and every single video in this part of the front line show us the loss of another Ukrainian vehicle or the group of Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainians are trying to counterattack, they're trying to cut this main supply line, but during this process the Ukrainians suffered huge losses and they're losing hundreds and tens of vehicles. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupyansk direction, where probably the most important updates are coming from. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the northern part of the city of Kupyansk and in the city or in the village of Kamenka. Let's discuss in details and step by step. The Russians are attacking the village of Kondrashevka, Golubovka. The Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation, and they are forced to introduce more and more forces on this line. The Russians control the situation, and the Russians are clearing one building after another. In this video we can see another temporary deployment point of the armored forces of Ukraine in the southern part of Kondrashevka was destroyed. In this video, for example, we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to redeploy additional reinforcements to the north to the line of combat contact, but the reinforcement was ambushed by the Russians and destroyed. So we see that there are very heavy clashes in this area. The Ukrainians are trying to slow down the Russians, but maybe as for now they they're able to do this, but they're paying significant price for this. At the same time, the Russians managed to cross the river of Oskol and to enter the village of Kamenka itself. And after the Russians managed to cut this village in pincers, the Russians started their decisive offensive operation. The Ukrainian sources published lots of videos how they were attacking and FPV droning the Russians in the village of Kamenka and in the vicinity of this settlement. A lot of episodes, but probably this one is the most important one. In this episode, we can see how the Russians entered, let's say, building in the southern part of Kamenka, and when the Russians took their positions, the Ukrainians began FPV droning them. This video took place exactly in this area. The building that Ukrainians attacked was geolocated, and based on this video, we have adjusted the map under complete Russian control. So we see that the assault operation has begun, and now every single day we are going to receive more and more videos, more and more updates that will confirm additional progress on the ground by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. During the previous night, the Russians launched another massive drone strike all over the entire territory of Ukraine. 3 cities were under complete attack. The Russians attacked the city of Kharkiv, the Russians attacked the settlement of Poltava, and the Russians attacked the city of Dnipro. A lot of explosions, a lot of destroyed positions of the armed forces of Ukraine and military facilities. The Russians are saying that the main target of this attack was to destroy as many as possible military facilities that Ukrainians used to produce drones. The Russians continue their offensive operation in the Sumy direction, and according to different mappers, the Russians improved their positions and they moved further along the river towards the settlement of Yunakivka in the vicinity of Basovka. This information was provided us by pro-Russian resources. Furthermore, the Russians returned their FPV drones back to Yunakivka and established complete control over the main supply lines. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians managed to ambush the Ukrainians that were heading towards Yunakivka. A group of forces of the armed forces of Ukraine managed to discover the Russian drone, and they stopped and they start thinking what to do next. But the Russians began attacking them, and as a result of this attack, several Ukrainian soldiers were wounded. A bit further to the southwest, we have another video, another ambush by the Russians. The Ukrainians were trying to bring additional forces to Yunakivka using vehicles, but the vehicles were ambushed and destroyed by the Russians as a result of FPV drone attack. So as you can see, the Ukrainians continue suffering losses, but they continue holding their positions with the purpose to slow down the Russians. And these activities tell us that, first of all, the Russians are planning to move further in the direction of Sumy. Furthermore, today the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, came to Sumy. And he was talking about the situation on the ground, and he thanks the remnants of his soldiers who remained in Kursk region for taking the war back to where it came from. He calls the Kursk offensive one of the greatest Ukrainian achievements during this war. The number of decades soldiers tells a different story. So we see that the situation is getting worse and worse, and we see that nobody is going to stop this war. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.